So first of all, thank you to James. Thank you to everyone here for trusting James. I don't know whether you'll trust him again after this. Has anybody seen James looking like this before? Dark glasses, and I'm not quite sure what you were doing with those two hands, but I really appreciate the trust that it took to come here where you really didn't have a lot of information about what was going on. As he alluded to, the experts in the room may be disappointed that we don't get more into the technical details. Today, we're going to talk about business opportunity rather than technology. If you want to get into the technology, we have a team here. My colleague Thibaut Chanteau will be joining me today. He has a slightly different perspective on what we're doing, and so we'll be jumping in and out as we go. But we will be available afterwards, and we will be available after today for those of you who want to dive into this a little deeper. As James alluded, I'm what you call an early adopter of technology. I've sold companies, and in the very early days of the internet, I served on the board of directors of the Canadian Marketing Association. I owned a company, data processing company, that processed millions of records every day to send out direct marketing campaigns for large corporations. And I built the first website for the Canadian Marketing Association, and I went to the board, did this whole presentation. You would laugh at what we built because it looks quite crude by today's standards. And when we'd finished the presentation, the president of the Canadian Marketing Association stood up and said, "Terry, I really appreciate all the work that's gone into this, but explain something to me. What possible value could the Canadian Marketing Association ever have with a website?" I mean, it sounds ridiculous today, but I suspect how many of you are being asked a similar question by your clients about topics like blockchain and distributed ledger? I see some nodding heads, yeah? There's a lot of skepticism. There's a lot of stuff out there. You could argue that the head of the CMA lacked the vision, but his question was 100% valid. So today, I'm going to focus on issues of trust and identity. Tibor is going to focus on items of velocity, visibility, verification in business applications, but this is really all about adding value, building trust, and actually going beyond that blockchain conversation. Sound reasonable? Okay, so let's dive a little deeper because, frankly, you can't blame people for being a little skeptical these days, especially relating to that comment you just made, prices going down, it's like the sky is falling. But these are the same conversations that people have had before. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and for every new innovation, from electricity to the automobile, from the PC, you remember those days, to the internet, people have mocked new ideas and new thoughts. And often it's the so-called experts who are doing most of the sort of laughing until they're not. So the question that really we want to focus on today is to go beyond the hype and not focus on do we need distributed ledger, but where and how should we apply it? Because applying the right technology in the wrong place is going to lead to disappointment, and then people go, "Oh, I told you so." So hopefully we get to explore some of that together. So today, my request is that we forget about Bitcoin and Ethereum and Ripple and Hyperledger and even IOTA, which is a technology that we're very involved with, and we're going to go beyond that and treat these essentially as representations of a new trust protocol that allows you to spread trust through the system. And the injection of that trust layer, just like we went from HTTP to HTTPS when people said, how can we be sure that people aren't going to be able to see what we're sending to the bank? This new trust protocol brought by distributed ledger is going to be the thing that makes a difference. All right? Tibor, on the way up, you were mentioning something about transportation.
Yeah, so I've done a lot of work with companies like MO Freightway or CH Robinson, and again, the big issue there was a lot of their time, disproportionate amount of their time and resources was spent chasing things that should be tracked easily. I mean, we have sensors everywhere, but they're always chasing things down. But somebody's looking for visibility, where is something it's missing or parts weren't delivered. So it was interesting that even in these days where they have all the technology going on, when it came to this one bottleneck, their first hour in the morning was just chasing PODs, proofs of delivery for different customers to find out where something is that was supposed to be somewhere else. And when you look at the cost of that, it becomes quite large. And I think it is tied to trust. I mean, I think the systems today, one of the things that they're lacking is we're building these areas where there's a compromise between visibility and flow and trust. And the more that we want to increase trust, the slower the flow is. So what we're looking at here is a layer of trust that gives a balance between flow and the security that people are looking for.
Yeah. So we're looking to use this technology to reduce friction, to reduce drag, increase visibility without sacrificing security. Because today, we wrap everything up in these big security levels, and we're not talking about replacing all of this, but actually just injecting layers into existing business processes that allow you to share that trust, open systems up in a way that don't compromise security, and in ways that actually help you get a better job done. So when we talk about distributed ledger, the whole point here is that not only can we distribute the trust, but because everything is written to an immutable record, triple entry bookkeeping if you like, everything is immutable, so audit, compliance, every step along the way becomes easier because you have visibility end to end. Now today, some of those increased capabilities come at the cost of speed, but just like we started the internet with 56K baud modems and then they got faster and faster, and when was the last time you used a modem? This is going to transform the landscape as we go. So you've seen this meme a million times, data is the new oil, but that oil is increasingly locked up in centralized silos. Centralization leads to concentration of power, and concentration of power frequently leads to abuse of power, which leads to lack of trust. The whole thing becomes a vicious cycle, and you end up with this fortress mentality because now you have to protect everything, not only from outside bad guys, but also from your competitors, because that data is your competitive advantage and has been. So this concentration also leads to honeypots. I don't think you can look at a news feed today and not be terrified sometimes by how many names, how many records have been compromised because of some data breach. How many of you have ever stayed at a Marriott or Starwood hotel? Yeah, I saw James like, oh, don't even go there, you know. So what has somebody done with that data? Brian, where's Brian? Brian is with the bIOTAsphere at the back of the room. I swear to God, just, what was it, 10 days ago? Yeah. 10 days ago, somebody hacked Brian's phone. They did a SIM swap, and within 2 hours, they had completely taken over his identity, hacked into all his systems. All the two-factor authentication in the world seemed not to make a difference. He spent the last 10 days to 2 weeks basically rebuilding his life. And this is a guy who lives and breathes security. So, you know, concentration of this data with these honeypots causes this problem. But the next internet, which is the Internet of Things, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with, is actually going to increase and exacerbate this problem and will demand decentralization, because you cannot have all of these things, billions of them, 100 billion things pushing data every second of every day, and the current systems of centralized data simply won't work. So right now I want to go back in time, because I think that sometimes before you pull out into the fast lane, it's always good to check the rear view mirror. How many people here remember looking up postal codes in the Canada Post postal code book. You remember you probably had one of those in the basement. It was dog-eared. It was usually 4 or 5 years out of date, so half the postal codes were wrong, or they didn't even exist if they'd built a new subdivision. So that was the business that I was in. And back in 1997, after I'd built this site for the CMA, because we were processing all of these millions of names every day, the post office, the Canadian Post Office, the US Post Office would send me, believe it or not, every month, a big 9-track tape, you know, those great big 9-track tapes, with the data of every address and postal code in North America. And we would use them to pre-sort the mail for the post office before we injected it into the postal system. So I had this inspiration. Why not take all of this data, put it on a website, make it available to the world? Now anybody who wants a postal code can look it up online. Seemed pretty good. Within 3 months, Yahoo named us the 9th most useful site on the internet. This is 1997. Okay, this is the Does anybody not recognize that sound? If it does, it separates you based on age. Yeah. So this is a collector's item. This is the magazine that they published. What's fascinating is not that, you know, this was in there, but the advertising in here. If anybody wants to take a look at this afterwards, the products and the offers and the new millennia, which was on the horizon, you know, we're living in the future. It's unbelievable. So we built this thing. They named us the 9th most useful place on the entire internet, which tells you probably how little there was. But people would call me from all over the world and say, thank you, you're helping our business, because now the mail that has the invoice that we've been waiting so long for, we can look up the postal code when it comes back as undeliverable and get it to the right place. So people already recognized the value of data to speed up and take drag out of systems. And instead of having the data secret, by freeing the data and making it available to a wider group, we actually had a huge impact. Anybody guess what the post office response to all of this was?
High five, Terry.
Pardon?
High five.
High five, Terry. Yeah, no, anybody else? No, they sued us. They sued us. Now, we won. The lawsuit got dropped. Of course, 5 years later, they did the same thing, but at that time, that was when I recognized that this centralization of data, that this ownership of what people consider to be this really important IP was actually a limiting factor. And it wasn't for some time until distributed ledger came along a couple of years ago, and I started diving very, very deeply into that, that I recognized that the missing piece of this puzzle was finally arriving. So more recently, we've seen a lot of large companies now try and go, if we look at the, if we look at the Venn diagram that James had before, where we had traditional business models, and this is the area that most people are focused on. They're focused on, okay, I've got a traditional model, how do I take this new technology and apply it here? So we've got old thinking, old models on old business rules, and they're trying to do that. So this is where the real opportunity is. IBM created this private blockchain. So they said it was a blockchain, but you had to be invited to it. And the IBM and Maersk were going to own all of the IP. Well, guess what? None of the other shippers wanted any part of this because they didn't trust that their biggest competitors who owned the system would treat them fairly. And IBM has now been forced to say, well, we're not so sure whether centralized or decentralized is the right approach. We know, we've always known, decentralized is the way to go. That's been pretty transformational. So it was Darwin who said, it's not the strongest of the species that survives. It's not the most intelligent of the species that survives. It's the one most responsive to change. And that's really what we need to think about.
What did the Venn diagram look like when you started?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when we started, this was, the taxi business, all right? Nobody thought about Uber. This was Airbnb, or the hotel business. Everybody dismissed this, but it's actually transformed the landscape. And that's that flip that we'll come to, but it isn't here yet. Did you?
I was just going to say the other is, traditional retail outlets and what was the encroachment of e-commerce. And you look at the model now, and I think this year they're saying that it's going to be more purchases online for the holiday season than offline. And it was a little encroachment like that, if you remember at the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, who wanted to buy something online, 20 years ago, even though you could? There was nothing to buy. It was inconvenient. Now, the thought of going to a shopping mall and facing Christmas crowds and dealing with parking, can't I buy that online? But the mindset absolutely flipped. So we want to talk a little bit more closely about autonomous economic agents because, Internet of Things stuff connected sensors is not new, but this whole idea of not necessarily just an autonomous vehicle, but actually an autonomous economic agent is going to transform things. Anybody got any thoughts of what an autonomous economic agent is?
Isn't a shop bot a bit like that, where you kind of send it on a mission? A shop bot,
You mean online?
Like you give it an activity to go find you the best price for something, and
Right.
it goes and kind of searches for you, brings you back answers. Is that similar?
It's a great thought. That would not be that. So that's a piece of software that's going out, finding a piece of information like Alexa. Where's the best price for whatever? It's a search that goes to a centralized database. They use some AI to search the data, and then they come back and they give you the answer. Today we have autonomous, or we're moving towards autonomous vehicles. But when I talk about an autonomous economic agent, we're talking about a thing that not only collects data, but actually makes decisions and may either sell that data or actually conduct transactions on its own without human intervention. It has the rules are given, and then that thing makes those choices.
Extend your point, if the bot actually then made a decision as to which of the shirts are the best for Tibor and then went and bought it for the best price, that would be the extension into the...
Okay.
Yeah, does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
Yeah. So, this is coming, and the ability to make not only a purchase decision, but micropayments, and in a world in which data is the new oil, to actually trade data for data or data for oil, machine-to-machine transactions, machine-to-human transactions. This will be the transforming thing when we talk about going beyond the technology, that you won't even notice the technology. So imagine if all the autonomous things in your supply chain could actually make their own decisions for themselves without requiring a person to make those decisions. How much drag would that take out of the system? So we're going to look at an example that we did. I drive a Tesla, and this thing produces a massive amount of data. Today, it's not an autonomous vehicle. It has all kinds of safety features, and it drives. And I started thinking, well, if the car is that smart, what if the car could start making some of its own purchase decisions? What if the car could actually buy insurance? How many people buy car insurance here every year? Quite a few of you. How many of you like buying car insurance? Okay, not many of you. And when it comes time to renew your car insurance, how many of you actually shop around to make sure you're getting the best deal? I'm not seeing a lot of hands here, seeing a lot of shaking heads. After you bought the car, often it's like, damn, there was a better offer I just saw, but it's too late. I'm locked in for a year. So what if the car could make that decision be your shop bot. Actually work out which is the best deal and then buy it. Now, the other challenge that we have is that lots of times your car is sitting. In fact, 97% of the time, 93% of the time, it's sitting in your driveway at home, at the parking lot at the office, or if you're away on business, in a parking lot at the airport. Why am I paying a high rate of insurance when the insurance company has no risk? So we built this proof of concept where we imagined a world in which so-called competitors could compete for the car's business in real time, not once a year, but literally every minute, every meter, based on how the car was being driven. Okay? So we streamed this a couple of months ago at a NUCO event from Europe. I'm going to show you a video, it's a 3-minute video, and then we can talk about that and discuss how we could extend the model. Let's see, hopefully this will work. Notice that standby insurance is running over here. There we go. So he's now in drive, and notice the moment he did that, the car said, the car is no longer parked, and in a non-parked situation, the best insurance provider is tortoise insurance. You'll see the car will start to move, and the current speed will pick up. There he goes. So as he starts to move, and we get the speed picking up, he's going to start paying, or not he, the car will start paying for insurance. And the insurance is a function both of speed and time. Now, when he goes above 30 kilometers per hour, tortoise insurance has a penalty, and there's now a special condition so that you're paying 30% more. But we're still with tortoise. He's coming down to the lights, and you'll see on the arrow there that the location is being updated in real time. Notice when the special conditions kicked in, the cost per minute rose. When he goes above 60 kilometers, his top speed is currently 47. Here we go. Oh my God, I don't think I can bear to look. It gets worse? Okay. So now he's gone above 60. We're now on the BFR insurance plan for this particular time segment. All right. Okay, go for it. Okay. And you'll see that the cost is rocketing, quite literally. We're getting all this information, and at the end of each period, based on what's happening, all of this data that's being collected, all of the information that's needed for the insurance will be written to the IOTA tangle as an immutable record. Now today data is collected, and insurance companies want to keep the insurance inside their silo. The car companies want to keep the data inside their silo. But it's important to understand that every single car that's out on the road today could start using this technology tomorrow if either the manufacturers actually included this technology at the point of manufacturing, or aftermarket providers wanted to do this. But in the demonstration that we've done so far, none of this actually knows anything about the user. But it's the car that makes the decision, it's the car that's choosing the best deal, and it's the consumer who gets the best rate. It's the insurance company who now gets all of the data that they need as part of a collaborative lake to allow better decisions, more informed decisions about where real risk is that are arriving in real time. Any questions, comments, thoughts on that?
We'll get speeding tickets without being actually caught by a
I'm
cop.
sorry?
We'll get speeding tickets dispatched to a home without being actually caught by a cop.
Actually, if you go on YouTube, there's a great video. Just put in the parking ticket avoidance, and it's got a Tesla that when it sees the parking person come, it moves away. So every time it tries to give it a ticket, you should look it up. It's a great video. It's about 1.5 minutes, but it does show the possibilities.
So, yeah.
What would be the difference with what Desjardins offers today, where you can put a little machine in your car and it does the same thing, where it tracks how you drive and then rewards you or penalizes you?
So it's an excellent question. So lots of companies, Desjardins, CAA, They ask you to put some sort of telematics device in the car, and then for the most part, they will measure your driving and reward you for good behavior. Two problems with the model. Number one, a lot of people have their driving impacted just for a very brief period to qualify. Secondly, a lot of people are really uncomfortable with having the insurance company know everything they're doing, where they're going, who they're going to, who gets all of that data. If you buy a car today, tomorrow, and it's sending huge amounts of data to the internet, who owns the data? Anybody? I assume if you buy the car, it's your data, right? No. No, the car company owns that data. They have copyright on that data. At the end of the year, Desjardins has all that data. If you're lucky, they may renew you at a 15% discount. So you've given up all this data, and they've trapped you because now you can't afford to change providers. So they're still using old actuarial models. They're asking you to provide them with new data. And if you're lucky, I think CAA, at the end, you get 5% for signing up. And at the end of the first year, you can renew at a 15% discount, provided you don't drive between 12 and 4 a.m., 12 midnight and 4 a.m. You never speed, and you do less than 12,000 kilometers an hour. Well, that's not really very practical. Sometimes I'm a wonderful driver. Sometimes I'm late for an appointment, and I'm going to put my foot down. I would expect to spend more on gas to drive that car fast. Why not spend more on insurance? The risk matches the way the car is being driven. So it's a completely different model. And whether it's one insurance company with different offers or dozens of insurance companies competing for my business like your bot, your shop bot, okay, everybody wins because the margins are appropriate for the risk. All right?
You are sharing all the data. Right?
What's that?
And that too with different companies. Even in this scenario, we are sharing all our driving behaviors
Yes.
with multiple insurance companies here.
In this model?
Yeah.
No, they only say these are the conditions. So there is a set of rules that say, you know, we're willing to make an offer if your car is doing this speed based on this, you know, the way it's being driven. They don't necessarily have access to the data. They have a verifiable audit that says, if in the event of anything, that what you've purchased is for the risk that they've agreed to carry, but everybody collectively gets the benefit of anonymized data so that all the insurance companies can mine that lake of data in a way that is secure because it's not necessarily associated with the individual user's location. To build better models, everybody wins.
Can I ask you a question? So what prevents that provider, in this example it's an insurance company, but I'm thinking of a technology provider that puts themselves in the middle of this as a platform. You're selling insurance, but because of the data you're gathering and the analytics you're crunching, I could think of 6 other service models I could introduce to it.
Yes.
And now all of a sudden this thing becomes a single provider with multiple agents.
Brilliant. We'd love to talk to you about those 6 business models. All right, so we'll be doing some of that, but that's exactly the kind of thinking when you turn the model upside down. Like we did this a couple of months ago, literally within hours, we started receiving phone calls from insurance companies and car manufacturers in Europe and around the world. So it's turning this model upside down that makes the difference. So where are we here? Let's go in here. So we've done all of this. So this is some of the stuff that we've been doing. Ultimately, in this particular exercise, it was every hour we were writing a record, but it is immutable and it contains all of the data, but it's fully encrypted. And there is no risk of personal information being broken down. So we're going to take that model of the car as its own autonomous economic agent, and we're going to take it a little bit further. We have some amazing props that the team at PwC has produced. This is not a Christmas present. This is a smart container. So I'd like you to think, I'd like you to think of this as a smart autonomous agent. And again, we tend to think of these things as things. We talk of the Internet of Things. I want to start thinking about the economy of things, where these things actually become really smart enough that you can imagine that each of them has an onboard computer. Look at what you carry around in your pocket today, more power than was used on the navigation system to land the first lunar lander, and we could put that in every container. So now the container is an autonomous vehicle, but why not fill it with autonomous pallets, each with its own identity, each having its own information and being responsible for the weight on the pallet, its location, so that it can be tracked. And we can also imagine that all of the sensors inside the container and inside the pallet are actually communicating data based on the individual items, let's say smart TVs, on that pallet, communicating that data back from the manufacturer to shipping agents to the receiving depot at the other end. So we're going to take our smart pallet, and if every item on here is not only smart, but is also the custodian of its own documentation, all right? Whoa. Where did you get your license? All right, we're going to put our smart pallet on here. So now the smart pallet is on a truck, it's driving towards its destination. What are some of the things that, if this was smart rather than just a censored IoT thing, what might this pallet do as it approaches the depot or the port where it's going to be loaded onto a ship? Let's imagine, just brainstorm something that might happen. I have a few ideas if you don't, but it would be great.
Pre-clear customs.
Pardon?
Pre-clear customs.
Pre-clear customs, that would be fantastic because it has all of its own documents and it knows what's on here. How about the truck is stuck in traffic? Pardon?
ETA?
So it could be updating its ETA, but what if it had an appointment at the other end and it could sell that appointment and actually generate revenue? No, say it.
Well, for a shipping company, usually that money is taken by the shipping company if they are charging another person to get on the courier.
Okay, it's a great point. And why do they take that money? This has already got the appointment. It's late. What if this could sell that appointment to somebody else? But does the shipping company control the lineup at the gate getting into the dock?
So if I could jump the line and pay less than the penalty would be for being
They do.
late?
They pay premium to have a shorter line to be guaranteed on that particular shipment instead of first come, first served.
Yeah, but things change as they're approaching. They get stuck. There's unanticipated stuff. So anyway, that's one possibility. So then, did you have a?
You could check into the gate and then alert the automatic surrender that comes and picks it up in the container.
Okay.
So size and shape and 24-person authority to be placed in the right whether it's going on a ship or on a rail or anywhere else.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. All right. So the next thing we have, I think, is we'll assume for the purposes of our conversation right now that we're going to put this container on a crane. So here is our crane. And it's not one of these big modern cranes. Okay? At some point, there's something missing that we haven't discussed so far that we'd really like to bring back into the system that ties in with some of the stuff that some of you talked about earlier. Anybody know what's missing? Because while the container is its own autonomous agent, it does have to interact with other entities.
I was going to say, you would have to sequence it based on whatever area the ship is reserved on.
Okay, I was thinking actually about entities that might actually have two legs instead of... Yeah. So many of you went through Palm Vein Scan to come in. You had to show your photo ID to get registered, and now you don't have to prove who you are because you actually become your own identity. Just before, it was a little bit sneaky. I asked, because I needed to get out to the washroom, and I asked Noah if I could borrow his lanyard security thing. And once he gave it to me, I now have access anywhere in the building that I want. And I'm
Partners,
yeah. Yeah. And if you just look like you're confident enough, almost nobody is going to stop you. And that represents a huge threat, whether you're in a nuclear power station or at a CN rail depot, because you want to know who has access to stuff. So let's bring our person in. How do we prove that the person who's going to operate this crane actually has the right to do so? So where's my piece of paper? I've lost my piece of paper. Who am I supposed to call for here? I've got it somewhere. You see, I lost my security clearance. Here we are. So, yeah. Nadia. Where's Nadia? Nadia. Come on up. The price is right. So, Nadia, I want you to be my crane operator for today. And no, I want you to come over here. And without revealing any personal information, because the whole thing here is, you know, sometimes you just want to know that binary condition of, is this person able to do this particular function? Today, we have to reveal huge amounts of personal data in order to identify ourselves. Think about if you go to a bar and they ask for ID, you show a lot of information when all they need to know is, can I serve you alcohol? That's all they need to know. So would you please put your hand, middle finger on the center there, and there we are. And instantly, so it tells you.
Thank you.
All right. So you have no access to operate the crane. I'm sorry, you're going to have to sit down. But thank you. Herman? Could you be our crane operator? Okay, so you have access to operate the crane on hazardous materials. Again, it may not just be that he has access to operate the crane, but he can actually operate the crane on the kinds of materials that are here. Now, these are obviously just examples. You can sit down at this point. It's not only that he has that authority, but perhaps that he has a certificate that has not expired. All right? So there's lots of information here because I may be valid today, but not tomorrow. I may be authorized for a particular shift or not to work on certain materials. I may have training to work on some items, but not on others. And we can do this without having to reveal huge amounts of data. So now we get to put our container on the crane.
If I can add, the other thing is that the owners of the container will also know when the access was denied, and they can track that, how many times people tried to get in and so on. And if you think back to the insurance, since I'm a wild driver and he's quite safe, my identity would trigger a different set of rates than his.
So the crane is being raised, and some event happens where the crane operator causes some catastrophic event in here that sets off all the sensors. Now today, the sensors are sending the data. The shipyard may know all of that, but that data is kept within a silo, and it's in their interest for that information not to go along the line. But in this world where you have this immutable ledger of distributed trust, not only can that data be written in some way that it's visible, but it could also trigger other events that are built into the system, like automatic opening of a claim to the insurance company, who now has a vested interest in knowing that that event happened. Perhaps the distribution center now needs to know that some event happened, and the stock that they were planning on having arrive may now be compromised because some of those flat screen TVs may be damaged. Yes, JP?
Barry, it looks like that ties with point number 2 of good fit over there.
Ah, oh, you mean these were up here for a reason? Yeah, so, you know, all of these things, which I think many of you have seen before, I'm told that these have shown up in lots of PwC things, when to use blockchain, when not to use blockchain. These are the kinds of things, you know, where you've got micropayments that actually speed things up, where the devices can make payments. And now to be able to trust that things that happened are recorded, are immutable, which also makes audit and compliance so much easier because it's not locked up in a series of separate silos. So interconnectivity, transparency is really, really good. Do you want to take over at this point? I think, was there some other point that we had that I'm missing? Because I think we want to get this baby on the boat, right?
Guess what this is? It's a boat.
All right. So through the magic of technology, the container flies through the air and is transported onto the boat. Take it away.
So at the moment, in many instances, this could become a blind spot. Again, you could have sensors picking things up, but often if they're not connected, that data is stacked up and it only gets transmitted when the boat gets into connection range or what have you. If you want to think about it even further and think about multiple containers, think about the boat itself as being an economic agent and some of the things that it could do vis-a-vis the data on there. But let's say something happens unforeseen, or looking at it this way, just if nothing else happens, we put it on the boat, there's elements of being blindsided. What are some of the things that can go wrong, especially as you look downstream? What are some of the things that currently would be blindsides or things that are taking too long to react to, just in a simple scenario like this?
I mean, the escape ship can be something as simple as late times.
Okay.
I think one of the biggest thing is if it's a feed ship going to a mothership, so everybody's kind of don't know whether it will catch the mothership or not.
Okay.
So that's always a worry that that kind of triggers, that kind of indicates how much quicker it would be. Right?
Okay, makes sense.
If it's a reefer and it has perishables inside,
Right.
then you want to know whether it's the right temperature, the right all conditions,
Right.
and whether they'll make it.
Right. Okay. So let's introduce some nasty elements. Where's our storm? Thank you. So now you do get some of those, and I wouldn't say unforeseen elements. You know, there is some predictability as to when storms come, but you know, the severity and so forth. And using your example in terms of perishable goods, or the example before, some product not making it to its final destination in time, or what have you. Again, having collected the data is one thing. What we can do now is begin not only a process of replenishing, so the end person or the end store can begin to think about other ways of supplying that store. Again, there could be transmissions to find alternative methods of getting things off the boat. As you say, if it's perishable, is there an opportunity to pull it out from there? If there's multiple providers, so if the container is carrying stuff from 3 different shippers, the individual pallets within there could transmit different information because some of it might be perishable, some of it might not be. And then there's the ability to also then try and see if you can market some stuff at a lower price because it's not the quality that you expected it to be. Yes, sir.
Would you highlight, because I think IoT does a lot of this stuff
Right.
today, right? What would be the difference and why would we want to use blockchain here?
So the big difference is that currently data is collected a lot. That's why we keep coming back to the fact that we understand that sensors are out there, data is abundant, and so on. The question is, what can you do with it? And who can you share it with, and how quickly in order to move things along? So if the challenge is visibility, again, earlier we talked that greater visibility should lead to faster flow, greater velocity, but all these trust barriers are blocking visibility. In this case, technology to some degree is blocking visibility because you can collect the data, but until somebody sees it, it's locked, sort of sailing the ocean in the storm. So it's what you could do with the data, and then of that data, what you can expose on a granular level to the right parties for the right reason.
Yeah, the lady, I'm sorry, I don't know your name here. You talked about, doesn't the shipping company want that? The beauty here is that with the IoT question, you know, everybody says, we own that data because it's valuable to us, so we don't want to share it. So the difference between just straight IoT is that it's not that we're just collecting the data, but the data can be selectively shared to provide value all the way along the chain from beginning to end by providing that auditability. And it's not just the data that we've talked about there. If individual containers fall off and they're all sending locational data and suddenly one container is out of sync with the others, maybe you can actually recognize that some incident has happened and trigger something else. A lot of times people are covering stuff up and you never get to know about it. And the audit process is sometimes so onerous that, you know, it costs almost as much as the underlying process. So to the extent that you can take that out of the system, you speed things up, you also make it more visible, and everybody wins.
And if you extrapolate into the future, if you're a manufacturer, you could put stuff on the boat and have people bid while it's in transit. So again, money and stuff is moving back and forth faster. So we weathered the storm, and we actually got into port, I believe. And we're over here. And we'll make the assumption that the person that offloaded the containers onto here went through and had the right permissioning. But now, of course, when you get it to port, before it gets to leave the yard, there's a whole bunch of inspections, customs, whatever the case might be. So in this particular case, and I don't know why my trusted assistant is, but what I would like is a volunteer, and specifically if I can get, Pete to come up and help me out. Pete? Peter? Oh, sorry, it said Pete here, sorry. So same exercise as we did before. Again, middle finger in that, and let's, access denied. So again, you know, in certain instances, theft and so forth at docks is a problem. This can give you, again, he can't get in, but you'll also know that somebody attempted to get into your container. So if I can get Emily to come up. So again, middle finger in the middle ridge, and then there you go. There you go. So you can take the container off. Now, you can take the container off in some instances, and again, if you're a customs inspector, I, as the owner of the freight, might be comfortable with letting you look at it and inspect it, but she might not have the right to take the content out of the container and so on. So you can deliver those kind of degrees of control and so forth. And this is another area where if, because of the holdup in the inspection and other factors, the container was going to be late for an appointment, it's another opportunity to buy or jump the line out of the yard. Make sense? And I think we have a breakout now, right?
Before we do that, Terry, do you mind just wrap up with some of the, when it's a good fit from what we just talked about and when you probably wouldn't want to stay away from?
Yeah, you know, today, if you need high performance access to data, blockchain is not the way to go, all right? It's slower because adding that extra level of trust requires that the decentralized network has to synchronize a lot of that data. So today, if you need high performance data, blockchain is probably not the way to go, but it doesn't mean that you can't continue to store your data locally in your silo to the extent that you want to be able to, and still write verification log data to the immutable ledger, providing access to everybody else. Now, obviously, if you don't need to share information amongst participants, and it's just between those two parties, why bother with blockchain? It doesn't add anything into the value. And if you don't need to be secure or you're not worried about records being changed to cover things. But, and if you control the system from end to end, you probably don't need a blockchain because you can put all of the controls in today. But I think that you will see more and more companies seeing large honeypots of data as being a huge liability. It's not just the risk, but it's the brand exposure, the liability of having all of that data at some point may exceed the values of being able to get that rapid access. So to the extent that you can abstract the data and only keep the data you need and distribute the data that you don't and protect it and secure it, that may be better. Obviously, where everybody trusts everybody, but I'm not sure that pool is shrinking today. We used to trust a much wider group of people, from governments, politicians, all the way down, corporations who said, trust me, we will never, ever share your data, until they did. And I think a lot of people are getting very cynical about a lot of stuff these days. Over here in terms of the good fit, because I would actually argue that when multiple participants need views of common information, that this might actually be on the other side. But instantaneous micropayments, if we start thinking about each of these items as its own agent, almost like a sentient being, actually able to make decisions that we can program in, micropayments that can be made where there is no cost of transferring a millionth of a cent, or zero value transactions just based on the data, because you can now transfer data back and forth, and where you need to be able to build trust in, and where today intermediaries, human intermediaries like your insurance broker, are required to to sit in the middle and take a big chunk out just for putting buyers and sellers together. All right. Any others that you want to sort of talk about here? I mean, we can all read, so I don't want to turn this into a sort of death by PowerPoint thing. But as we go, you can see that when data needs to pass between participants of different systems very rapidly, these kinds of solutions can actually provide a lot of lubrication to a system that otherwise contains a lot of friction.
So as part of the setup for the next group, we also wanted to talk about the fact that this also has benefits in reverse, whether you're looking at reverse logistics or whether you're looking at replenishing at the store level. So we're all familiar, or are we familiar with the bullwhip concept, or the bullwhip effect? So that's where you have a minor anomaly at the retail level and it just keeps growing because everybody up the chain has to compensate for it in, I guess, deadweight inventory, right? So the more visibility that you have down the chain, and the more that you're aware of any anomaly here, so all of a sudden I sell one more pair of shoes than I normally do, instead of everybody in the system having to have that much more inventory for the next possibility, the visibility created by blockchain, again, the right parties having information, the right information, could actually cut out a lot of fat and add velocity and cut down the amount of money that's sitting in inventory just for the purposes of the bullwhip effect.
Presumably after 2 years of reams and reams of transactions, you get a high level of predictability, and then you start to introduce that level?
Well, not only that, but I mean, to Brian's point earlier, it's if you have a lot of containers sitting on a ship, then you can begin to triangulate all the anonymized data and you can begin to see a whole bunch of different trends that everybody in that pool can take advantage of. So the payoff to them, give us anonymized data that's collective across the whole ship or fleet, and then begin to use that. And I would argue there's an opportunity for some smart people to continuously sell that data in a smart way. Yes, sir.
Why would a steamship line agree to do that? Because you see, in today's world, they keep all that data. And as you said, they can sell it.
I'm not sure that they would agree to it. I think much like we talked about, and the reason that circle is up there is the market is going to take them there. So if they hope to play in tomorrow's market, they're going to have a choice. They can go the route of TradeLens, which is the IBM Merck's thing that nobody wants to go near. Or they can say, you know what, using some of the security layer, the trust layer, and some of the trade-offs, I'm willing to do this because I could benefit from the data too, and I could sell that data to get better ships or charge a higher premium or find different lanes.
Wouldn't it be an extra service that the shipping company is offering to their suppliers? Yeah. We're going to give you data about things throughout the
So you can make better decisions, so we can plan better, so everybody makes more money.
No, that's it. I mean, they would give control of the data. Like, they wouldn't allow a container to be emitting its own data.
I think they're not going to have a choice. I mean, again, if we go back 10 years ago.
It's actually owned by a logistic company, not a shipping company.
I know. But
They
when
jump in, the shipping company just moves it. They're monitoring all the time.
But when it is on the ship,
Yeah.
I mean, the container can't send out information without using the infrastructure of the ship itself.
Who said?
So if, yeah. Well, okay, so there are parts of the ocean. Yeah, there are parts of the ocean where maybe they don't have signal, but the data can still be collected locally, and as soon as the signal is there, the data catches up.
If the money is there, the satellite is following it all the way. So you can monetize it in many ways and pay for itself. But I think this is one of the points that came up early when James introduced the whole concept, right? Which is you got this new technology and you're trying to look in the rearview mirror. I agree with you 100%. If I was that shipping line, I'd say no way. Just like the post office said no way to the postal codes. But it was the market that forced them to change. As soon as I stopped shipping it with them because I get better data and better rates for exchanging data with another shipper, I think they're going to comply.
Yeah, I used to send the mailings for Blockbuster telling people who subscribed to their mailing list about all the new releases. And when Netflix came out, you know, primarily because they didn't like late fees, Netflix was addicted. They made their money on the late fees. They made their money on the stuff you didn't watch, not on the stuff you did. And the irony is, they had the opportunity to buy Netflix multiple times and they turned it down because they were so stuck in that rearview mirror mindset that they just were convinced and addicted to the old model. They didn't see the new one coming. Just ask any taxi driver who said, oh, Uber will never catch on, right?
Yep.
Quick question. So we just on that, so that there's a company like Arcom. They have two different offerings, one being wireless and the other one being satellite. And they'll give your wireless pretty much everywhere you go, and then they will say your satellite is for your remote areas where it's way pricier, but you don't have other options. Question, is there so going to the fits and the not fits, is there any substantial challenge you can think at a macro level that goes beyond stakeholder alignment or beyond, you know, business model, you know, challenges internally? Is there anything else that you've encountered that would make this entire chain possible? Because I think it's valuable if it's in entirety. I think pockets is what the IoT probably does today, but the blockchain adds value in its value chain entirety, right?
Yeah, and you may not get everybody to buy in from end to end in your, you know, original pilot, but as you start connecting people, the ones who are left out will actually want to be in, because actually joining is not a threat, being left out becomes the threat.
The other thing that I've had a chance to talk to Terry and to Laura about this quite a bit that I thought was quite interesting was that the credential example there that was happening, or even when you're moving the product, when something moves outside of an SLA, whatever agreement you have, and triggers something like insurance, I think this is where it gets really interesting, which is the insurance company probably doesn't trust the shipping company or the dock company, right? But if you have this layer that everybody can buy into, then it enables a lot of things to happen automatically and for the transaction to happen automatically. But until you have that trust, and one person or two people don't own the repository, I think it's tough for that to happen. So I think that's one of the good use cases.
It is the tragedy of the commons, you're probably familiar with that, that we're so self-interested that we actually hurt everybody. If we actually could build for the more common value, we'd all benefit instead of just focusing on ourselves. So we just have to find that point where things flip, where everybody wants in, as opposed to saying, no, this will never work. It will. The only question is not if, but when.